Hello everyone. So tonight is September 11th. I know it's not a Jewish holiday, but it definitely has a lot to do with Jews. Besides all the conspiracy theories that they blame the Jews for it, for everything, like Abba Eban, when he was the UN representative, said that if there was a proposal submitted to the UN saying that the earth is flat and the Jews flattened it, Israel flattened it, there'd be 162 nations voting yes, 13 no, and 25 abstaining. So beyond the joke, as I was driving here, so you see the two projectors going up. I don't know if you know, there's a few days before September 11th since that 13 years ago. So they have these two beams of light for around a week that you can see from very far, essentially replicating the towers of light. And of course the Empire State Building is in blood red, and all the different other symbolisms and commemorations. The reason I mention it, even though as Jews we've been around in history and we have our holidays, Rosh Hashanah coming up, and Yom Kippur and the high holidays, Sukkot, and then we have the rest of the holidays of the year. September 11th is not one of them. But yet, everything is divine providence, and when events happen in the world, especially ones that don't affect just one person or two people, as Maimonides writes in the laws of Tainus, in the laws of fasting, he opens up with a very powerful statement that says that when a calamity befalls a community, it's chzarius, it's cruel to ignore it and say it's just mikra nikris, that it just happened. And what is the Jewish approach? That we have to look at everything in introspection and look at our own actions and look at our own behavior. And there's no distinguishing, frankly, from one tragedy or another, even though there he does discuss the fasting, the reason we have fast days throughout the year, especially connected to the destruction of the temple. But the principle, the concept that nothing happens by accident in this world stands no matter what event takes place. Especially one that is very much rooted in the Middle East and very much connected to Israel, the Jewish people, and to begin with Abraham himself, because it's his children that are both the victims and also the perpetrators, and much is done in the name of religion, etc., etc. So I thought it appropriate to speak about this. I remember vividly 13 years ago, I'm sure all of you are old enough to remember where you were when the planes crashed into the Twin Towers here in New York, and the Pentagon in Washington, and the last plane that fell somewhere in the fields in Pennsylvania. I was walking to my office. It was around 9 a.m. in Brooklyn, and the towers were struck around 8:51, I believe. So it was 10 minutes later. I was walking. I had no clue, and someone said to me, "Go up to the roof." So I went up to the roof of our building, where I saw both towers smoking. It was a sight to behold. I called my father, who always seemed to know everything. He's a journalist, and I called him. It was hard to get through because the cell phones were all difficult. I guess everybody was using the phone, so it was cluttered, the channels, the airwaves. And finally, I got through to my father. He didn't even know about it. And he said to me immediately, without hesitating, he said that Muslim Arab terrorists, so Muslim terrorists. How he knew, I'm not really sure, but he had his hand on the pulse. As I said, he was a journalist, so he had the sense. And I remember then they chased us off the roof because no one knew what was coming next. Who knows what kind of other attacks would take place? Thank God. For whatever reason, they could have easily, Al Tiftach Peh, I don't want to even mention, they could have easily blasted, suicide bombers can blast a bridge, a tunnel. They could have created so much more panic. But at the time it was panic enough, and no one knew what was happening. I remember even, you saw the images of people walking over the bridge from Manhattan. The whole New York was, all of the United States, all airspace was frozen, all that rest that subsequently happened. And each of us have our own memories of it. So I remember they chased us off the roof, so I went down to my office, I turned on the television, and I was watching. Everybody was still shocked. There was images. No one had a clue because, it was like complete out of nowhere. no warning, nothing. In the middle of a beautiful Tuesday morning, beautiful blue sky. You could see it in the images, the contrast of a beautiful New York morning, and then this. Until this day, 13 years later, I think everyone who thinks about what happened still doesn't really understand what happened. Like, what was the point of it all? What was the objective? Obviously it spurred American anger, and all that happened afterwards. We've rebuilt now the Freedom Towers, but the attack still remains this enigma that is very hard to explain. If your children ask you what was the reason that they did it, it's hard to answer that question. I mean, it's easy to say a bunch of meshugayim, crazy people, but we know that it's not just that. And more importantly, look, it's 13 years later, and really, has anything changed? As I said, we always think positively. We don't look for panicking, and we don't take frightening. We don't look at things with frightening eyes. But frankly, the same source of ideologies that were able to do it 13 years ago still exist. As a matter of fact, maybe even more strength. Look what's going on with ISIS in Iraq and Syria, Middle East, Hamas, Hezbollah. The names go on. Al-Qaeda is just one of a whole group of different variations of similar ideologies, all rooted in Muslim fundamentalism, that, if you think about it, has not in any way been weakened. And it's probably a miracle that I'm sure America and other countries have intelligence that have probably prevented and preempted other attacks. But at the end of the day, how much can you preempt? And I'm saying it, and again, not to in any way frighten any of us, but the situation in the world has not gotten calmer. No battles were won. The so-called declaration of war of the Muslim fundamentalists stands as strong as ever. And their statements like, declarations like that they will vanquish the Zionist crusader plot against Muslims is their objective. Just heard of last month when the ISIS was announcing that we will have a caliphate, a Muslim caliphate, with our flag flying over the White House. Now, I know it sounds to many of us like fantasy, but hey, it's coming from a place which I'm not suggesting that they can usually conquer this country, but there's definitely a direct declaration of war, and it's a new type of war because it's not the conventional war. Even Yimach Shemai, may his name be erased, Hitler and the Nazis, it was conventional warfare. What do I mean by conventional? There was a country here you are, there's your enemy, and you're fighting with the Air Force, the Navy, the infantry, and all that comes with it. Thank God the Nazis were not able to develop an atom bomb fast enough, but so America preempted and then dropped the 2 bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, which finally ended the war with the Japanese. But conventional in the sense where you have a defined enemy, and then it's a matter of who's going to outmaneuver whom. And as obscene and as repulsive Hitler and the Nazis were, but everyone knew what their goals were. It was very, very clearly defined. They wanted control of the world for the Aryan super race, superhuman race. They need what's called Lebensraum in German and also in Yiddish, means they need a lot of space. And they were ready to enslave the rest of the world under their power. And of course, Jews eliminated completely, as well as some other unacceptable peoples to them. And that was it. So, as repulsive as I said, and obscene as these goals are, you at least have something to define. What exactly is the goal of what bin Laden, who has since been killed, which doesn't mean it changed anything. We got even with him. So, okay, vengeance was achieved. But what exactly is the battle about? And what would be considered? Can you even surrender? In every battle, surrender is an option. What would you surrender to? And I submit the reason that we don't have answers to this, when I say we, I mean the American and Western world, is because they have not yet come to terms with a real war of ideology and religion and faith. We do not want to believe, the Western world doesn't want to believe that it's an ideological war. Because it's very difficult to fight ideological wars. And this country has, frankly, with all its firepower and wealth and prosperity, is actually very lethargic when it comes to ideology. There is no ideology. Sadly, in a way, Israel follow suit. To say an ideology that just leave us alone, don't kill us, that's not an ideology. That's a common, that should be the request of everyone. But ideology is even if it's a completely, as I said, obscene and disturbing ideology, it's still an ideology. And you cannot fight ideology with weapons. Because those that believe will do whatever it takes, for good or for bad. And throughout history, you'll see all religious wars were extremely difficult to beat because you're fighting a holy war. When it's a holy war, it's God. And once it's God, I'll do whatever it takes. And in our words, lahavdal of we call it mesiras nefesh. You're ready to die for the cause. And we don't need any proof of this. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of Muslim young men and women who have died for their cause. And this is very, very disturbing when you have to address it. I've spoken to quite a few people in my life here in this country after September 11th. You see, before September 11th, for Israel, this was a reality every day, which is why Israel has developed such sophisticated defenses. That's why El Al is the safest airline on earth, because they know they're targeted, and they're not naive. But the rest of the world, until September 11th, was really not exposed to it. So in a way, September 11th, you want to put it, you could say it's a watershed juncture in history, where suddenly the Western world, and I talk about the United States, and Europe as well, suddenly were woken up to a reality that they had no idea was there. Sleeping giant, if you want. So who was it that coined the term clash of civilizations, already earlier part of the 20th century? There's a clash of civilizations. There's no question about it. This is not to suggest that every Muslim of the 1.5 billion Muslims wants violence and wants war and will do whatever it takes to kill Westerners or Jews, etc. I don't believe that, absolutely not. Not because I'm liberal or anything like that, because I just don't believe that's the case. However, Muslims do have an ideology. Some feel that it should be done in a more, it's called democratic way. You know what? Simply outnumber the Europeans and outvote them. And once the majority in France and in other countries in Europe become Muslim, it's not even a war. It's the democratic process will reward the majority, and that's essentially one attitude. I know some people find that chilling as well, but that they're using the system at least. And then there are others that are ready to say you do whatever it takes, the violence. But you have to remember, Islam is a religion, and Islam as a religion has an ideology, just like Judaism has the ideology, and just like Christianity has an ideology. And as many books that have been sold after September 11th, books about Islam went up through the roof. In America, I still think most Americans have no clue what Islam stands for. And frankly, a lot of it is very beautiful. I know it's difficult, not politically correct to say it always, but some of it is very not. And some interpretations of it are what we're seeing right now. So this isn't some type of violent, marginalized group. It's a very serious element. And it goes back, if you go to the teachers and the scholars of Islam, and I did my research, and you'll discover where these thinking is coming from. It's coming from very strong philosophical underpinnings that all Muslims are sympathetic to. Not all Muslims, unless they embrace, and definitely not everyone's going to go on suicide bombing, but are they sympathetic to this ideology? Just like, and I don't want to compare it, but just like Jews may be sympathetic to a cause that you may not fully be radically behind, but you're not going to be opposed to it either. And that is that, like every religion feels that it is representing God in conquering this world. In conquering this world for godly purposes, to make this world a more spiritual and refined place. Islam feels that's what it's doing. Christians feel that's what they're doing, and Jews feel that's what they're doing. The question is how you go about it. We as Jews have preceded others, so we can talk and pull rank. So that's why I feel it's critical, and I've said this many times. I speak now as a Jew, as a proud son of Abraham, as you are as well, sons and daughters of Abraham, that we have a lot to teach the world right now. And it's actually not just an option. I think it's incumbent and behooves us to rise to the occasion and have something to say. Because if we don't have anything to say, the religion that precedes them all, that all are really outgrowths of, then who is going to have what's up to say? You're going to turn to political leaders, to Hollywood stars, to sports athletes. Who exactly is going to speak? So we have, thank God, a long history. We've seen the worst. We've seen what's going on now, and worse. How many millions of Jews? How much blood is running through the streams and rivers of Europe in the name of Jews being Christ killers, etc. And all the pogroms, even the Holocaust. Though Hitler and his henchmen were not per se devout Christians, but many studies have been shown that there never could have been a rise of Nazi Germany had there not been a climate that the Christian world created of anti-Semitism, because it would never have been accepted. So years and years, there's a book called Faith After the Holocaust by Eliezer Berkovitz. He makes the case, like others have, but he makes a very powerful case. He says that the years and years of building up this type of anti-Semitic attitude to Jews created a climate. The Holocaust could not have happened without Christianity, basically. And most Christians will admit that as well. They don't say they agree with it. And just like 100 million Germans, and that's the argument, when you say, hey, it's just a minority among the Muslims. Yeah, Hitler was also a minority. We know the National Socialist, which is the short for Nazis, National Socialist Movement, were a minority. Yeah, but that minority got into power, and the majority did not oppose them. So that makes you an accomplice. That's simple. You're complicit in a crime if you're silent. It makes no difference if a president of the United States comes from a minority group, but he becomes then now the ruler, and the rest of the country follows along. Then, for all de facto purposes, you could yell and scream, but you allowed him to do it. So that with that attitude, that ultimately we've seen it all, and not only we've seen it all. If you go back where the roots are of all of these issues, all these battles, go back very directly. You open up a chumash that we read from when we're children, and we read it in the Torah every week. As a matter of fact, Rosh Hashanah. What do you read about Rosh Hashanah? The reading of the Torah. You read about Yishmael and Yitzchak. You read about it very specifically. It's all written in there. Why would you read Rosh Hashanah about Yishmael? You can read about this, the blessing that Sarah had, Apokad Hashem as Sarah, that God remembered Sarah. She had a child, because Rosh Hashanah is a time of remembering. Why do we need to know all the details about Yishmael? So there's a prayer that we say Rosh Hashanah in the Musaf, in the Zechrenos. We say Val Medinas Baya Amar, which means this is a day that God also designates the destiny of nations. The destiny of nations is determined on Rosh Hashanah. Because Rosh Hashanah is not just a Jewish holiday. It's the birth of the human race. On the sixth day of creation, Adam and Eve were created. Adam and Eve are the father and mother of all human beings on earth. And therefore Rosh Hashanah is really the collective birthday of the entire human race. Many Jews are not even aware of that. As a matter of fact, on Sukkot, for example, the reason that we bring 70 offerings in the temple and we say it in our prayers, why 70? Corresponding to the 70 nations of the world. So the relationship of Jews and the nations has always been a very critical one. And because Avram Avinu, Av Hamoyin Goyim, Avram is the father of all nations. So Adam and Eve, and therefore Rosh Hashanah, is connected to the entire world. And the destiny of the world is determined. So I remember 13 years ago, that was when I began writing a weekly column after that, because we say in Rosh Hashanah, Hayom Haras Olam. Today is, how do you translate Hayom Haras Olam? So there's two interpretations. Haras, some interpret as the birth of the world, from the word hiroyan, like pregnancy, gestation, the birth. But Haras also comes from the word tremble. Today the world trembles. So I wrote the first column I remember it was just 2 days after September 11th, before Rosh Hashanah. I wrote a column called Today the World Trembles, Today the World is Born. And how apropos it was, literally, September 11th being the third day of Slichas. It was Tuesday morning, right after we said Slichas that morning, 4 days before Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah that year, I believe, was Shabbos. Definitely the end of the week. I think it was Shabbos. It can't be Sunday, and it can't be Friday. It was Shabbos. I think it was Shabbos and Sunday. Because I remember I flew to Florida for Rosh Hashanah, and remember when we flew, the planes were completely empty, and the towers were still smoking. I mean, they smoked for a few weeks because there was but they were still smoking. I remember because we could see it. It was quite a sight, and the plane was mamish empty. I mean, maybe 4 people on the plane. No one was flying. Everyone canceled. The whole thing was because no one knew what was going to happen next, etc. And that's what I wrote. That's exactly, in my mind, that prayer captured exactly what the world was feeling at that time. And as I said, not much has changed. The only thing that's changed is that, thank God, we didn't have to experience it again. But the roots of the issue have not changed at all. Nothing has changed. The same hate is being spewed week after week, every Friday, in the mosques across the Middle East and in Europe and the United States, for that matter. Just read some translations online of what is said on a conventional Friday sermon in a mosque. You won't believe it. If any leader would say anything like that, they'd be accused of who knows what. It's like almost laughable if it wasn't so tragic that there's all kinds of accusations of Israel doing that. Just read one of those, the complete incitement. Go and find every Jew and kill him. I mean, you're talking about find every Westerner, find every American. I mean, you're talking about literally. So you could say it's only words. But that's what's being spewed, and that's how children are being educated across, whether it's Sunni or Shiite. As much as they hate each other, there are certain principles being taught. Now, again, I'm not going to say that everyone is going to be a suicide bomber, but there's no question. What do they say about these things? They say not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslim. And I'm unabashedly and non-apologetic saying this. I know politically correct means there's an ethnic screening, etc., etc. But it happens to be when there's an ethnic group that all the problems are coming from one place, you got yourself. Yes, it's not stereotyping, it's not discriminating, it's a reality. If all terrorists in the world today, God forbid, and I don't even want to say it, were Jewish, it doesn't mean all Jews are terrorists. You have to say the same thing. So I don't see this as a double standard. You have to call a spade, which means that Islam, and in its called growing pains, as it comes into the modern age, has not yet come to terms as the Christians have, and I've pointed this out a number of times. In my opinion, I have no doubt that Islam today is more or less where Christianity was like in the 15th or 16th century. Go by the 15th, 16th century. It was as violent, if not more violent. We all know about the Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition was a church-based Inquisition, finding what? Heretics. Exactly the same words, heretics, infidels. And what did they do? Look what the Inquisition did to infidels. And that was the same ultimatum. I find it so ironic that what the Christians did to Muslims and Jews, Muslims as well. The Muslims, especially ISIS, is doing to Christians, and they would do it to Jews too, except there are no Jews left in Iraq. So it's like everything comes around. If you read some of the prophecies, it's pretty accurate what will happen. Basically, I see it like, in a way, maybe, and God forbid, I don't think anybody should be beheaded or killed, especially without due process, etc. But it could very well be it's coming around, and not that any individual, but essentially Muslims are doing to Christians what Christians did to so many people before them. This is by no means a justification. I don't want anyone to misinterpret what I'm saying. It's just a historical observation. And if you want to be honest, you have to look at the whole picture. You can't just look at the year 2014. You have to look at the whole story. Someone told me, a businessman in Brussels, who's developing his exit strategy. He's a Jew, but he's a secular Jew in Brussels. He's already moving his exit strategy to China, etc., because he sees Europe falling. As many do. He told me an interesting thing. I may have mentioned it, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. He said, had Europe not allowed 6 million Jews to be killed, Europe today would be the most powerful country, most powerful continent on earth. Because how many Jews would be today in Europe? At least 15 million, 20 million maybe. And Jews are Jews. They would have found innovative ways. They would have built business. Basically, they were all killed. So the few that remained, but most either were killed or had to leave. So it's interesting how everything. So the arrogance of the European world and the anti-Semitism of the French and of the British and the others, there's a medrash that says, a mechilta, that says something very powerful. Some of these things you don't always want to speak in public, but hey, you know what? It can't make things worse. That's how I see it. So there's a interesting medrash in Mechilta, which is also based on a Gemara, somewhat of a Talmud, that says a similar statement. But here's what it says. Listen to this. That the nations where Jews will multiply and grow will become superpowers. And then, when they will persecute Jews and exile them and expel them, they will lose their power. It's a medrash. This medrash is around 2,000 years old. Look at history. Tell me this is not a fact that has been supported by historical fact. Let's start with Egypt. Egypt was once the Egyptian Empire. Undoubtedly, everyone knows how Egypt was powerful. But as long as the Jews were there, as soon as they got rid of the Jews, Egypt disappeared. What is Egypt today? Yeah, it's still on the map, but it's not a superpower. You go through the list, the Persian, the Greek, the Babylonian, the Assyrian, later the Roman, all of them unbelievable empires. And they all went after Jerusalem. They always, whether they knew it consciously or unconsciously, they knew there's something with Jerusalem and Israel. What is Rome interested in Jerusalem? Rome is in Italy. What are they doing in Jerusalem? Why are they going there? Well, of course you could say because all the major religions are based there. But remember, Rome was not yet a Christian country. It was not until Constantine, the second, third century, where Rome became Christian. What was Rome doing in the Middle East and destroying the Second Temple? Why were they threatened by this little country? So either consciously or unconsciously, everyone knew the power lay there. There was some power there. And then that power emerged. Obviously, with the birth of Christianity and the birth of Islam, it became very obvious. And that's what the Medrash says. And you show me one nation. The Spanish Empire was the biggest empire. The Spanish Empire basically conquered the New World. That's why so many countries speak Spanish in South America and so on. What happened? In 1492, they expelled the Jews. And tell me, how many years did it take for Spain to lose complete power? So the Medrash has been borne out to be true again and again. Here's another phenomenon. China has more people than any other country, yet it never achieved superpower status. Today some predictions, well, we'll wait and find out. United States is a superpower. Which country has been the kindest to the Jews? The Russian Empire. The Russian Empire had the most amount of Jews in the 19th century. Some say 10 million, some say more, who knows? So even though it's still powerful, but it's no superpower anymore. So I say this, first of all, I say with a sense of pride, but there's a deeper reason for this. Because the Jews have always been the conscience of the world. And in some mysterious way, whether you're a skeptic or not a skeptic, that voice has power. There's no question that 14 million Jews, completely, 0.001% of the population of the earth, you would never know it if you looked at headlines, if you looked at Nobel Prizes, if you looked at the noise and the controversy. I just, for a few weeks ago, just wanted to, for my own edification, I decided to just check out. I was reading the New York Times, and I was just looking how many articles about Israel, as opposed to other articles. And, okay, you could say in the last few weeks, months, it was the war there. But you go back 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it's almost unfathomable. If someone did not know, they think Israel is the largest country on earth, and because simply more stories about it than any other story. And I'm not getting now criticize and not critique. So, however you want to explain it, and I'm sure you can find all kinds of interesting explanations. Thomas Friedman bends over backwards to explain in his books why Israel is a double standard, because Israel is the place where all the major religions, Islam, Christianity, the magnifying glass is on that country. And that's why they get criticized more than so on. Maybe that's the case. But why? Why did Israel give birth to these other religions? You still have to get to the root of it. And I submit it's quite simple. Just go back all the way to the beginning. In the beginning, I said Adam and Eve, Al Medina's Boya Omer, which we'll say in Rosh Hashanah prayer, is that the destiny of nations is determined on Rosh Hashanah. And a little later, another man was born, 20 generations from Adam and Eve. 10 generations was Noah. We have the Bnei Noach. This is the name, one of the legal names to the nations of the world, the children of Noach. Either from Shem, Ham, or Yafes. That the entire population of the earth, which was destroyed in the Mabul. So who's now the progenitors? It was first Adam and Eve, but everybody else. So the only one was left was Noach and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yafes. Semite comes from the word Shem. Semites. So Shem gave birth to his children, and 10 generations to Noach. Basically, 20 generations from Rosh Hashanah, when Adam and Eve were created on the 6th day. 20 generations later is the birth of Abraham. And that changed the entire world. Today, 2.5 billion Christians and 1.5 billion Muslims all follow the path that the pioneering monotheistic Abraham initiated. And what did he teach? He defied in a pagan world, including his own father and his own family. Entire culture, entire society. He defied a paganistic view of the world, which you can say maybe a pluralistic view, a duality view, a view that every God that man conceives of is God. So instead of, as the Torah says, that God created the human in the divine image, the pagan world created God in the human image, which is essentially another word for Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah is considered the greatest sin. With murder and incest, it's considered the worst possible sin. You're supposed to die before. So you can understand murder. You don't murder someone else, you allow yourself to get killed. Okay, there's some logic to that. Same thing with incest. It's such a terrible crime. But Avodah Zarah, we understand it could be foolish, it could be stupid. Why is it such a great crime if a human being decides he's going to bow to a tree, or to a star, or to a stone, or build some graven image that he considers to be has divine, some deity? Big thing. God is not secure enough. He's jealous of stones and sticks and stones. What's the problem? People want to be foolish. Be foolish. Like the Rebbe, the Talmud says already. Because of a few fools, God's going to destroy the world. That was talking about when one of the philosophers asked the sage, why, if God doesn't want idolatry, let him destroy the sun and the moon. So there won't be sun worshippers, there won't be moon worshippers. So God said, because they're fools, God is going to destroy the world because of a few fools. So let them be fools. What's the big thing? The Tosfos Yontiv actually goes further and asks the question, why didn't he follow up the philosopher and ask, why didn't God destroy the fools? That would be a good question. And he answers a very basic answer, free will. You can't stop someone from being a fool. The whole purpose of existence is you have will. Okay, so that's that. So you don't destroy the sun and moon because of the fools, you don't destroy the fools because of free will. As, Isaac Bashevis Singer cynically once said, we must believe in free will, we have no choice. That's just a footnote. It's not relevant to the discussion here. Okay. Wrap your head around that one. For Rosh Hashanah, you could think about it over the tefillahs. How you resolve that. Okay. So what's the problem with Avodah Zarah? If you think about it, just give it a little thought, you'll understand immediately. The foundation of any morality and virtue, and any system that is humane, is based on one key principle. It's not about you. If life is all about me, and your life is all about you, we have no coexistence, and we ultimately have what we call ish esroi chayim bloi. One person will swallow up another. Self-interest will always conflict with someone else's self-interest, and I want what you have, you want what I have, and kol dal and gvar, whoever's stronger is going to win. So, Avodah Zarah, when you think about idolatry, you know what it really means? It means you decided what God is. It's a God on your terms. A God on your terms is the foundation of all problems. There's no humility. It's not you're submitting to serve something greater than you are. You're basically serving yourself, and now you've created a God to fit your comfort zone. So it's not really a God. It's basically just you, an extension of you. Avodah Zarah basically is self-worship. But you're calling it a tree, a star, a stone. Because what was the problem, as Maimonides explains in a very eloquent, beautiful introduction in the laws of Avodah Zarah, he explains, how did it come? How did people who believed Adam and Eve, there was a God. They knew the God was an invisible force beyond them. What happened? So he says, what happened was the invisibility of divine, invisibility was a problem for them. They wanted something tangible. But they didn't mean to worship it. They meant to say, you know what, God created a beautiful universe, a beautiful cosmos. There's stars. These are God's creations. So I'm not worshiping them. I'm worshiping them as part of God's creation. And the next generation came and said, you know what? I don't see God. I see the stars. So the stars became an end in itself. And the next thing is some people said, hey, the stars are in heaven. I need something on earth. A little closer. And then came the charlatans and said, hey, you're already building on earth. I'm the doorkeeper. If you pay me enough money, I'll let you into a sanctuary that represents a certain star in heaven. So basically, slowly, like anyone, no one gets lost in the woods like that. You veer off a bit, a little time passes, like all mistakes. They all start with a small little shift, and then the next thing you know, you're completely lost out somewhere. That's essentially how he explains it. But I don't want to elaborate so much on that, more elaborate what happened next. Maimonides continues and then says, until came the Esau Hagadol, the great strength, the great power, the great light, called Avram Avinu. And he reversed the process. A world, because what happened 10 generations after Adam and Eve? Once you start self-worshipping, there's no way that there has to be self-destruction. That's exactly what happened. Ha'aretz Molech Chametz, as it says in the beginning of the chapter in Noach, that the world was filled with crime and corruption, and they turned on each other, and they self-destroyed. You can say the Mabul, the flood, was not a punishment. The flood was a cause and effect. Cause and effect of a world that was at each other's throats and already killing each other. Comes 10 generations later, and Abraham begins to bring light into the world. What's the light? He goes against the selfish attitude of a God on my terms, and he comes to realize that if you're going to accept a God, it's a God on God's terms. And it's you that's serving God, not God serving you. That this world was not created to serve you. You were here to serve a higher purpose. I mean, to put it in simple terms. But it didn't come easy. It took him years to discover this. There's actually 3 opinions when he discovered God. Some say when he was 3, some say when he was 22, some say when he was 40. So many reconcile that basically means 3 levels of appreciating God. It's not a machlekes mitzias, meaning you can't argue about the fact. Which one was it? So it's 3 levels. 3 years old you recognize some things. At 26 you recognize other things. There may be a fourth opinion if I recall correctly. But the point is it was a process. As a matter of fact, when we first hear about Abraham, besides his birth, in the Torah he's already 75 years old. We don't even know much, biblically at least, from what really happened these 75 years. But clearly, it'd be a fascinating story because here's a man who grew up in the world. He had no shul to go to. He had no rabbis to talk to. Maybe that was a blessing, actually. So he had no one to corrupt him. So he basically went on a journey, grassroots journey from the bottom up, and figured it out. And through a process of elimination, a man of integrity and honesty, not looking to satisfy his own comfort zone, looking for emes, like in the words of, again, the classic words of the Rambam at the end of Hilchos Tshuva, Esau emes mipnei shu emes. A man who committed to truth or did truth, fulfilled truth, because it was true. Not because of a physical reward or spiritual reward or some other ulterior motive. And this man changed the world. Simple as that. That's why you can be proud to be a son, a grandson, a granddaughter of this man. And him and his wife became a beacon of light, like that attracted Avram Megayer Anoshim. Sarah Megayer says Anoshim, that they affected men and women who flocked to them because they had a theology, they had an approach, and ultimately it translated into commitment. It wasn't just a philosophy; it was a commitment. L'mana she'yitzav es bonav es beis achrav, a man who committed his family, his home, and the generations to come, lasa izdok mishpat, to a path of charity, virtue, justice. Essentially, the principles that are cherished so much today in the world, which frankly, till 300 years ago, were not. Were an anomaly. With the founding of the United States and a few other countries, you started having principles of justice, that all men are created equal, that people have inalienable rights, individual rights, the right to freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom. These are principles that Avram Avinu taught based on a God that's greater than any one human being. What dominated in the last two millennia, until the last few hundred years, 3 millennia? What dominated was either the monarch, or a church leader, or some other despot, or some other fascist, or whatever you want to call them. If they happen to be benevolent, great. If not, too bad. And they were actually considered closer to God. Kings and queens were considered closer to God than the average person. You look at the proletariat and the bourgeois in the French Revolution, and you see right away that was the division of classes was seen as divine. That you were born into slavery, or you were born a peasant, and that's where you die. I mean, it became popular in Les Miserables, or Les Mis, or whatever you want to call it. So most people know it from the Broadway show. Some people know it from Victor Hugo's book. But it actually captured very, very clearly that when you were born miserable, you remain miserable, which is what the book is about, and that you're doomed, so to speak. Things changed, but they didn't really change. They really embraced the Abraham's principles that were born many, many years ago. It was only the lone little nation called the Jews that carried the flame for so many years. And that's a critical component in this whole story. Because let's just trace back the steps. So Abraham is teaching this to his, obviously to people all around, but also to his own family. And who is his family? 2 sons. First Ishmael, who he had with Hagar, which we read about Rosh Hashanah, as I mentioned, interestingly. And then the second son, Yitzchak. Yitzchak, Isaac, would give birth also to 2 children, Esau and Yaakov, twins. And Esau and Yaakov would also be at war, just like Ishmael and Yitzchak are at war. Okay, so you could say you read the Bible, fine. Brothers are battling. The whole Torah is filled with battles like that. But it doesn't end there. If you retrace the steps and you connect the dots, let's take the next step. You look in the Bible, what happens at the end of the Parsha Chai Sarah, you find, at the end of Parsha Toldos, I should say, you find the Torah, for some reason, decides it's important to delineate the entire progeny of Ishmael, who his children were, where they landed, which nations they dominated. The Sari Ishmael, that's what's delineated. Okay, interesting. Then you continue reading. Then comes the story of Yaakov and Esau and their battles. And then at the end of Parshas Vayishlach, you have a whole same thing with Esau. The Torah decides to delineate all the details of Esau and his family. So when you read it, you wonder why. So Rashi has commentary, different explanations here and there. But it's critical, you'll see in a moment why. Because the Medrash tells us a very interesting thing. Now the story continues. What happens in the Torah? You only hear about the story of Jacob and his children. They end up in Egypt because of the famine. Then starts the Golus Mitzrayim, the slavery, the bondage, and they're freed from Egypt. And they go on their journey all the way to the Promised Land. And you don't hear much about the children of Esau again and the children of Ishmael, except here and there. But they didn't go away. Because remember, these are Abraham's children as well, and grandchildren. So what happens is, there's a verse that we'll read in a few weeks from now, in Hazinu, that says the following. So Hazinu is like a poem. It's a little cryptic, but it says the following words. Okay. Amim. Yeah. Oh, come on, I'm not finding it. Anyway, there's a verse there that talks about both the one that will rise in Seir, which refers to Edom, which is Esau, and a verse that talks about Ishmael, and so on. And the commentaries explain, Rashi explains, that refers to an episode that takes place when the Jews arrived at Mount Sinai. I don't know why I'm not finding it. Okay, fine. I'm sure I'll find it when at some point. I thought it was right in the beginning. Now, what happened when at Sinai, when God was about to give the Torah? So it says he turned first to the children of Ishmael and asked them, do they want to receive this Torah? And then he turned to the children of Esau and asked the same thing. And both of them had the same answer. Let's check out what it says in this book. They checked it out, and it said things like don't steal, don't murder, lesinaf, don't do anything sexually inappropriate. And they said, no, we can't live up to this, and they rejected the Torah. And then God went to the Jews and gave them and offered them the Torah. The question is, what exactly is going on here? What kind of story is this? First of all, was God playing games? He didn't know that Ishmael and Esau are not going to accept it. Secondly, what would have happened had they accepted it? what would happen? The Jews just suffered 210 years in the Holocaust. He promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that their children are going to receive the Torah and they're going to go to Israel. And suddenly, hey, last minute, maybe I should give it to Ishmael and then Esau. What would happen if they said yes? No. It's a very, very important question. So the Zohar gives a very powerful answer. He says, when God shows something to someone, even if they say no, they mean there's something is affected. And sometimes to pave the way, let's say you're ready to offer your child a gift. You're almost sure they're going to say no. But today they say no. But maybe in a few years from now they'll say yes. So it's like preparing the ground. The Zohar says that there's going to be a day, Oz epech el amim sofa brura. In the prophecies it talks about the transformation of the nations to God. And God was preparing the way by offering it to them. Knowing that today they may say no, but at some point they will accept the principles of Torah. And look in history now what happened. Around, so we're talking Matan Torah then, around 1,000 years later, the principles of Jewish thought in the Torah began to seep into the pagans of Europe, whether you call it through Jesus or the apostles, however you want to interpret it, and slowly grab their attention to the point that 2.5 billion people today are Christians. 600 years later, a same man rose in the Arabian Peninsula. His name was Muhammad. And he, also taking principles from the Torah, brought it to the Bnei Ishmael, the pagans of the Arab world, and Islam was born. So, though it's far from perfect, but the principles that were given by Matan Torah, that God's offering, they say, Havamina and Torah is also Torah. That's why in the Gemara and the Talmud, when you hear sometimes Havamina means an initial consideration. Someone will say, I'm considering to interpret so-and-so, and they interpret. Then afterwards come the rabbis and the other sages, and they say no. And the ruling is against the initial. Why do we document their initial argument? If he's wrong, and that's it. Because there's every point of Torah, every point has something to teach us. The legal ruling may not be there, but there's a logic that we need to know. And that logic remains legitimate. Maybe the logic doesn't apply in that situation, it'll apply in a different situation. So there's two things in any body of knowledge. There's methodology and there's a conclusion. Even if your conclusion may be not the way the person who was teaching the methodology suggested, but the methodology doesn't mean the methodology is wrong. If something doesn't fit the methodology, then it doesn't belong in Torah. Torah has a methodology. Yud Gimel Midas. There's 13 so-called methodologies. We mention it every day in davening, by which we interpret Torah. Shammai uses it. Hillel uses it. But the most cases, the law is like Hillel. But it doesn't mean Shammai's ideas are not Torah-based. They absolutely are. As a matter of fact, if you really push it, you can find elements in Shammai's thought that may be used elsewhere, even though in that particular situation, in one situation, it's not applied. So the same thing is God showed the Torah to the other nations. It wasn't just playing a game, and it wasn't just knowing that for sure they're going to say no. What's the point? So most people say the point is he was a good lawyer. He knows they're going to say no, so might as well offer it to them, let them say no, so they can't have tinus later. That's what the Gemara of Avodah Zarah more or less says. They can't say later, you didn't ask us. Yeah, but let's be honest, this is God, and it's a little more than that. The answer is that yes, I may have known that you wouldn't say yes now, but the point is that the message is for everybody, the universal message. As a matter of fact, when the Jews were receiving the Torah, it says the entire earth stood still. A tzipor lev tziftzuf, a bird did not chirp. Everything became quiet. It was still. And the nations of the world came running to Bilam, who was their let's call it the alter ego of Moses. Leikom Novi. It says a great prophet didn't rise in Israel like Moses, but not in Israel. Among the nations, Bilam was a top gun, and they came running to him. What's going on? Why is it so quiet? And his answer was, Hashem eiz la'amayitin, Hashem yivarech hasam v'shalom. God is giving His strength, His power, His Torah to the Jewish people, to His people. Which means, why is that important for them to know? Why does the world have to become silent? The Jews are getting us in their shul. They're getting a gift. Maybe we should keep it quiet under wraps. Why does the whole world have to know? Because it's not meant just for the Jewish people, it's meant to change the world. We were charged to change the world. The fact that for thousands of years we've been persecuted and maybe we developed our defense mechanisms and a Golos mentality can be maybe understood due to the circumstances. But we were never here to be on defense. We were here to be on offense. Avram was on offense. Moshe Rabbeinu was on offense. All the greats were always on offense. They were here to bring light to the world. Ner lagoyim, lagoyim, a light onto the nations. However, as I said, what happened was, yes, when you're under the gun, you're being shot at and persecuted and killed. It's very difficult to suddenly say, "Hey, listen, I have a message to teach you." So we've paid heavy prices for our morality and for our convictions. But at the end of the day, Jews always knew that we will prevail. Not only will win, we'll prevail, God will prevail, and the message will ultimately permeate the world. This is fundamental Jewish thinking. Most Jews today, especially from Jews, hear what I'm just saying now, they'll think it's heresy. That's how disturbing it is. Because it's become so trapped in a ghetto-like mentality that a statement that I just made will be sound as some type of progressive, liberal statement, and it's absolutely not. I would submit that this is legitimate mainstream Jewish thinking. Now, obviously, I'm a gay bedover, I'm presenting it, but I'm not quoting my own ideas here. These are Gemaras, these are talks about a world being changed. What is Mashiach at the end of the day? A changed world, a changed consciousness. Mala Orez Deis Hashem. Every shul on earth that it says Haftarah, Achar Pesach, says there will be no more Lo Yareya V'Lo Yashchisu. There will be no more evil and destruction on my mountain, my holy mountain. Key, why? Because the world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. And Maimonides makes it very clear. And we all know that klal is when Maimonides rules something in halacha and no one opposes it, it means they agree. Because the Ravid, if you know the Ravid, who didn't mince any words when he disagreed, which is itself a very fascinating thing. If you ever look at Maimonides, a Rambam, and then look at the Ravid says such sharp things, you never think, how could you publish such a thing? He literally humiliates and insults the Rambam. And it's published in the Rambam on the side. But the Klolim state, the rules state, that when he doesn't oppose, it means he agrees, because when he opposes, he lets you know. And Maimonides rules that when Mashiach means it doesn't need a miracle, it doesn't need any type of miraculous change. It means a change of consciousness. Lo yeh kol ha'olam, the world will be involved, nothing else but knowing God. And the world there, he means the non-Jewish world. And then talks about the Jews as well. And there'll be no more leikinu v'leisachus, there'll be no more jealousy and no more competition. Le'mulchama, no more war and no l'rov, no more famine. A humanitarian world, which we could say our world has come very close to that. Obviously, we still got our challenges, but it's a very different world than it was several hundred years ago. You know, there was in Haiti a few years ago a earthquake. What happened in earthquakes in history? An earthquake in a country, all the neighboring countries, everyone came to pillage, rape, steal, rob, destroy the country. Here, suddenly, all the countries of the world, Haiti, which has almost no resources, everybody's competing. Who's going to give more humanitarian aid? Why would we give our hard-earned tax dollars to save a country called Haiti? And yet America gives billions of dollars of humanitarian aid. This is unprecedented. So cynics like to say the reason for that is because America is cultivating a new market for McDonald's and IBM and Apple, etc. Yeah, maybe that's somewhat of an ulterior motive. But, you know, the Romans also had ulterior motives, and they didn't do that. They didn't cultivate it for their marketing. They basically enslaved the people that they conquered. And when there was a eruption of a volcano in Italy and Greece, the whole country came down, and everybody around it basically helped destroy it. So there's been shifts. However, the world is still not at its resting place, and we still have to deal with Bnei Ishmael and Bnei Esau as well, for that matter. So what happens? Let's fast forward. The world continues to go through its the growing pains, throes. And as I said before, Christianity, which maybe was born before Muslim, maybe that's why they matured faster. So the Bnei Esau, Bnei Edom, and Esau is Edom. We call this Golos Edom. So it's not some Golos Edom. This is the Golos, that the Roman exile that we were thrust into after the destruction of the Second Temple, considered to be the harshest of all exiles. Edom is Esau. Seir is Edom. Esau is Edom. Edom. As a matter of fact, Rome, the name Rome, is Remi, Magdiel Zu Remi. Rashi says at the end of that chapter I mentioned, Vayishlach, Magdiel was a grandson, a son of Esau, and that's Remi. Remi means Remimus, like Magdiel, Gadol in Aramaic. So you're referring to literally children of Esau. Is it only children of Esau? Obviously, as it says in the Talmud, that Sancherib, the king of Assyria, Bilbil, he confused the entire world. So there's no such thing as just a pure line. But for that matter, Jews also. I mean, Abraham was hardly blonde and blue-eyed. People in that region are usually not that color. So how that got into our gene pool, it's clearly not just from pure Taras Mishpacha. Let's put it that way. So the point of the matter is the world has been definitely confused, but still there is lineage. That's the Bnei Esau. Bnei Ishmael has emerged in the last 100 years. The Ottoman Empire has fallen, but God blessed that part of the world with oil. And oil gives you power, especially power to blackmail the Western world. So the Bnei Ishmael, the children of Ishmael, are benefiting from a prayer that Abraham himself said, Lu yicheh Ishmael lefanecha. Abraham said to God, may it be your will that Ishmael should live on, should perpetuate. And therefore, it says in many holy books that that's why God blessed Ishmael with certain wealth, and God made sure that they would persevere. However, the radical battles that went on between Ishmael and Esau and Yitzchak back then, today are no longer between two individuals. Now it's two nations. So it's not surprising that the children of Ishmael have such antipathy to the children of Yitzchak. Now the truth was the same was with Esau and Yaakov, but as I said, there things have gotten tamer. It's no longer the world of the Middle Ages. So there's a verse in the chapter told this, So you know that Isaac and Rebekah had the twin boys that I mentioned. But it's an interesting thing. So in her pregnancy, which was difficult, it says the children were struggling in her womb. Meaning, before they were even born, they were already at each other's throats. This would be later the Christians and the Jews. As a matter of fact, as he says there, so Rivka goes to Hashem and asks God, why am I having such a difficult pregnancy? And God says, you have two nations inside of you that will always be at war. Kishazeh come, when this one will rise, this one will fall. And he refers specifically to Rome, to the Western world, and to the Torah, and to the Jewish world. So when Rome rose, what fell? Jerusalem. And when Jerusalem rises, Rome falls. That's what God says. This is a verse in the Torah. So in their mother's womb, they already have the battle raging. But then the Torah continues and says, "Vayigdul ha'na'arim," and the children matured. And this one, Esau became a warrior, and Yaakov became Ishtam, a scholar. Rashi says, what's Vayigdul ha'na'arim? Now, Vayigdul means they became bar-mitzvah, 13 years old. Because 13 years old is the general age when maturity settles in. So these two boys, at their bar mitzvah, they grew up. But there's an interesting midrashim and Zohar as well that say, what's Vayigdul ha'na'arim? When they grew up, also Esau grew up. He also matured. And he matured, as it says in the Yalkut and the Zohar, that says he matured because Avram Avinu, who was still alive at the time, had a positive influence on Esau. And Esau was a shomer Torah mitzvahs and was committed. There's different explanations that it was till Avram passed away, etc., etc. So Vayigdalu also refers that Esau also matured, not just physically, he also matured spiritually. But then Kilkelus Ma'asov. Then he went the other way. Moshe, after Abraham passed away, when he was 15. So the question is asked, but then it says in the mother's womb, it says they were struggling. Yaakov wanted to go to the synagogue, to the basic medrash. Esau wanted to go to Avodah Zarah, to the church, so to speak. Whatever the churches were then. So this is before they were 13. So what it means that they 13, they suddenly matured, and the medrash says in a positive way, also in Judaism. So the answer some give, a very powerful answer, was that this was an inclination of Esau. He didn't act on it. It was an inclination that he had the power to overcome. It's like the Rambam says, there are two types of people. There's a chassid ha'ma'ula, someone whose basic role is really to bring goodness into this world. And then there's a kevish yitzrei, someone whose job is to repress inclinations, negative inclinations. So Esau was given the challenge of having certain inclinations that he could overcome, and he did overcome it until later, when he finally his free will, he chose to go the other path, which also explains how could you could say with Yishmael, Avram and Hagar. So Avram was a tzaddik, Hagar was not necessarily. But here you're talking about Isaac and Rebekah. They conceived Esau and Ishmael. How Esau and Jacob? How could Esau even have a negative side? But if you think of it that he had his challenges and he could have overcome them, and then he chose otherwise, that would explain that. Why am I saying it? Because Vayigdal and Na'arim is 13. We're now 13 years from September 11th, 9/11. 13 years is a maturity process. So hopefully we should be at a place where we should be able to grow up and understand the real battles. Have we grown up or not? This is a good question. I always think about the fact that it only says it by Esau and Jacob. What about the Ishmael? Has he grown up yet? So you don't have an expression like that. It does say earlier that he did grow and so on, but it doesn't speak in that term. So I'm thinking that perhaps, as I said before, that the children, descendants of Esau, have, not in a perfect way, have become tamed, have helped create a haven for all people in the United States and in other countries. And the children of Yishmael have yet to reach that Vayigdal Na'arim, that state of maturity. So when you stand 13 years from September 11th, we have to stand back and say, okay, what have we learned in the process? Have we learned anything? And if not, why not? And I submit the reason is, as I said earlier, is because most of us, I say us, I mean most people in the Western American world, don't know how to relate to these type of ancient battles, religious battles, ideological ones. But rest assured, it's a completely ideological battle. It's not a battle over land and not a battle over resources. It's a battle over ideology. And you don't need more. I mean, God sends messages. Look at what the ISIS say. They're not talking. They're not interested in. I mean, it's true they may be interested in money, the kidnappings and their ransoms and so on. But what they say and they claim is we're interested in conquering the world for God. Look at how as disgusting as it may be and appalling, they keep using the word God every time they do those crimes. So what's our response? Our response is what? Don't kill us. You have no right to kill. That's not an ideology. The response has to be is to go back to Abraham's words. Abraham, who introduced this concept in the first place, and say, how do you introduce God into this world in a peaceful way? Now, I don't know if it's going to take 13 years or 26 years or 39 years, but I speak now, as I said, both as a Westerner. I grew up in this country myself. I'm born here, so I'm pretty much familiar with the culture. But I also speak as a Jew, which is thousands of years old. And that's what we need now. And as I said earlier, it behooves us. We're responsible to lead the way and help illuminate what is really going on. And what's really going on is a battle for God. There's no question about it. The problem is that most of the Western world has basically rejected God in many ways. So our attitude is, don't bring God into the picture. God has only created problems. That's what many people say. That if we were able to get rid of all religious wars, we wouldn't have our problems. That's not the answer. First of all, you can yell that all day and night. It's not going to help. The answer is that there's a way to bring a benevolent God into this world without destroying it. That's the answer. And that's exactly what Abraham taught. Yishmael was a pera Adam, the Torah says, a wild man. Yod bakel v'yad kol bay. His hand was everywhere, and everywhere was his hand. It was like complete wild. What you see today. I remember 13 years ago tomorrow, which is September 11th, 13 years ago, when I was standing on that roof, and then when I came down, I was watching. I literally opened up the Chumash and I heard that verse. Pera Adam. Who else besides a wild person would blow two planes into buildings like that? You have to be pretty wild to do that. A wild person, Yoda Bekel, it's not even a rational act. So Abraham recognized, as Sarah even more, wildness, the passion of Yishmael. He was a passionate man, but a passion that was not bridled, that was not tamed, Exactly what you see today. Wildness. A wild behavior. I know it's a mild term based on what they're doing, but we have to be able to look at it in his face and not just say, I'm repulsed by these beheadings and let's just kill them all. You have to understand where they're coming from. They're coming from a wildness that is not tamed. And I always think about it. When you read the Torah itself, the Bible, without the oral interpretation, there are a lot of verses that can be interpreted very radically. For example, it says an eye for an eye. Right? A life for a life. So you could say, you know what? Look, maybe the Saudi Arabians and the Sunnis, because for all the beheadings happening in Iraq and Syria, I just heard in the last 2 weeks in Saudi Arabia, there were 20 beheadings. They behead people, and they cut off arms, and they all kinds of other such behavior. So, obviously we're focusing not on Saudi Arabia, maybe because there's too much oil there, but, and ISIS sounds like a very, radical group, but they're doing it there. And you could say, because when you read literal Quran, or literal Havdal Chumash, Torah, you have statements like that. So why is it that Jews don't do beheadings? Why is it? Because you know why? Because Torah b'Perusha Nitna, the Torah came with a commentary, and Moshe Rabbeinu, when Moses came down with the Torah, he came with a whole series of interpretation. And without that interpretation, you can't understand the Bible. So I was thinking, maybe with the Quran is missing, as well as maybe other books, is a Torah Shabbat Peh. Maybe they only have a book, but they don't have a proper interpretations. Because without the interpretation, you really can lose the spirit of the message. Anyway, there's a lot for us to teach the world. That's the point. And every one of us, I think, is responsible, especially as we enter Rosh Hashanah, when we pray for the nations of the world. We can't just sit and just dig ourselves like an ostrich, our heads in the ground, and say we don't see the world. We're responsible to help illuminate things, bring clarity. That's why I think it's so critical, and that's why I talk about these things very vocally, because who else is going to teach the world how to look at these events? I think the Jews are the only ones that can, because we've been here since the beginning. We know what Abraham taught, and we've seen and suffered at the hands of all of Abraham's children, Esau and Ishmael. Cryptically, we will be saying next week in Slichas, and the second day of Slichas, there's a prayer called Yisrael Noisha. The Jews should be saved. And we'll be saying there a statement that says, Chilos Seir ve'chaisnoi. That Seir, which goes on Esau, should be disappear, together with his father-in-law. His father-in-law was Yishmael. So it's a very cryptic statement, but we'll be saying it in the Slichas. You can check it out. So the Abarbanel, who himself lived during the expulsion from Spain, and he writes in his commentary on the book of Daniel, it's called Mayone HaYeshua, he brings there that the problems in the world, and he had the same issues, except it was a little different then, but you had the Muslims, you had the Christians. Spain at the time was a Catholic country when the expulsion took place in 1492. But the Moors and the Muslims and the Ottoman Empire was on a march. So those battles were taking place, and he writes about it. He brings there very interesting, which I've quoted, you may have heard it from me, or I've written about it, an interesting medrash. It's more of an obscure medrash, but it says it. So you have a story at the end of, in the book of Genesis, at the end of chapter Torah, when Esau hears that Isaac and Rebekah send Jacob to go find a bride, where? To go find it in the home of where Isaac came from, Haran. And then the next chapter goes, Vayetze Yaakov meBeersheva Yelech Harana, and that's where he meets his ultimate bride, Rachel, Rachel, Leah, and the whole story. His uncle Lavan was a brother of Rebekah, his mother. So when Esau hears that, he also goes ahead and to find someone from the children of Abraham, because he knew that would please his parents, and he saw that there was something in that. So he found Basmas, the daughter of Ishmael, and they got engaged, and they're going to get married. Here's the medrash. This is fascinating. I mean, you can make a movie out of this. Comes the wedding day. The wedding day between who? Esau and his prominent father-in-law, Ishmael, who's also his uncle. Because Ishmael is the brother of Isaac, half-brother of Isaac. Okay. So here's the medrash goes. they sat down to negotiate, a nadin. They negotiate a dowry, not a dowry, what's the positive? A gift from the father-in-law to the son-in-law, to this new couple. So Esau comes up with a brilliant, hatches a plan. He tells Ishmael quietly, listen, you kill your brother Isaac, I'll kill my brother Jacob, and we'll be left with the wealth of Abraham, because there will be no more heirs, it'll just be you and I, because they each had one brother. So Ishmael, who is no slouch, says to Esau, Haloi Cain anochi? You think I'm like Cain, who killed his brother Abel? Hevel? I'm not going to kill my brother. What he also knew was that they were both scholars. Remember, they were Abraham's son and grandson. So they're both scholars, so there's a law that says that if you kill someone's father, the son has a responsibility to avenge his father. So Ishmael, of course, understood that once he kills Isaac, and what's going to happen next is Esau is going to come pursue him to fulfill a mitzvah. He'll become a tzaddik now. He's going to avenge his father's blood. And then he'll be left alone without the entire wealth, and nobody will be left. No Jacob, no Isaac, no Ishmael. Only Esau. When Esau hears that his father-in-law rejects his business offer, he leaves the bride probably all dressed in white and crying under the chuppah or whatever it was. I don't know what kind of marriage they did those days. And that's it, he left. But the story is not over. After Ishmael died, he comes back and marries her. And the Barbanel says, and that's where all our problems come from. Because now suddenly Esau, no pun intended, is in bed with Ishmael. And that is the problem. So it's one thing, Ishmael's got his battles with Isaac. Jacob got his battles with Esau. But now when Esau and Ishmael have come together, which may be some of the oil conspiracies that go around these days, I don't know, however you want to interpret it, that's when the plot thickens and it gets much more confusing. Some people say America is the cause of all the rise of all these terrorist organizations. Al-Qaeda, they say America empowered in order to fight Russia. And some of the others. I don't know honestly, I didn't do my research, and I'm not a big believer in conspiracy theories, but that doesn't mean there aren't any. And I'm sure it's more complicated. When you're dealing with billions of dollars of oil, rest assured, where there's smoke, there's fire. Or as Balzac, the great writer, once wrote, that behind every great fortune lies a great crime. So I'm sure when there's a lot of money, guaranteed, it's not pure clean. So maybe that's part of the marriage between Esau and Ishmael that still lingers, and is coming back now to bite us big time. And who suffers the most of all of this? The Jews. Because they're neither Ishmael nor Isaac, nor Esau, as I discussed at length. So here we are, bar-mitzvah year from 9/11. The question is now, will we mature? Vayigdol and Arim. The children have matured. Can we mature and understand what's going on? Because I firmly believe, Yediyas hamach lachetzi refuah. Have the knowledge of the awareness of a problem is half the cure. If we truly understand the problem, we'll be able to resolve it. Because if it's true to say that the Muslim world needs to mature, and it's obviously we're not here, we can't impose it on them, but we can insist. The battle is not on the battlefield. It's not with weapons. It's in the mosques and in the schools and in the homes of the Muslim world. That's where the battle is. It's what is being taught to those children. What kind of religion is being taught? Why are they being taught a strain of violence in that? Why can they not be taught exactly the same thing that is taught, and that God is a benevolent God? And if you know something, you meet an infidel, you know what you do? You do what Abraham did. He prayed for them. We have a whole chapter in the Torah, Sodom. Sodom is infidels. The whole word Sodomites come from where? From the Sodom. Cruel to each other in the most horrible ways. God wants to destroy the city, Sodom and Gomorrah. And what happens? He first considers hiding the fact from Abraham, because he knew Abraham would pray for them. And that's what happens. Abraham accuses God, Hashefet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, God, the judge of the world, is not going to do justice, etc., etc. Maybe there are 50 righteous people. How could you destroy them? Maybe there's 40, maybe there's one. It ends up being there aren't any. But Abraham did not just take it lightly. He didn't just, he should have celebrated. Hey, behead them all. They're infidels. They refuse to do tshuva. So kill them all. It should have been a great day of celebration. How often do you have a situation where we always have the wicked prospering and the good suffering? Finally, the wicked are suffering. You should celebrate. Because b'nefel evecha al tismach, we don't celebrate even when cruel people die. We cry. We cry that human beings created in the divine image could have fallen so low. That doesn't mean they may deserve it, but it's a day of celebration. Abraham goes and tries to find some redeeming factor. It completely shocks me to think, why is it that Muslims who consider themselves devout forgot that chapter? It's so clear. It tells you what to do when there's infidels. Whatever. But the point I'm making here is this is what the message should be. And I know it sounds like crazy if someone will say, well, right now they're busy killing innocent journalists or others. And so there's no time for ideological discussion. I understand. Of course, in a time of war, you don't sit down and philosophize. You have to do what it takes to protect yourself. But if you want a long-term solution, and now we're 13 years later, the battles that have just began raging now have just been brewing for years. It's not like, oh wow, I'm shocked. There's still a terrorist in the Middle East. Is anyone shocked? No one's shocked. We thank God that we weren't awake to the fact. And hopefully they all goes back to sleep. But let's be honest. Sleep what? You're talking about a sleeping giant. You're talking about something that is brewing. Marx and Engels wrote a specter. What's the word? Hangs over. Not hangs. What's the word? A specter. The beginning of Das Kapital, their manifesto, their communist manifesto. A specter hangs over Europe, and that specter is communism. That will take over capitalism. So a specter hangs over the Middle East, everywhere. I mean, what more divine providence you have? While Hamas is doing what it's doing, you have the ISIS rising in Iraq and Syria. And ISIS is, what's the acronym? Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And President Obama insists on calling it ISIL, which tells you even more so. Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Levant is the name of the whole Middle East, the whole region. They're not just looking for Iraq and Syria. So very clear, I see it as divine providence that it all emerges now. And interestingly, 13 years from September 11th, we're about to enter Rosh Hashanah, the prayers I mentioned. So it's the writing on the wall, if you ask me. You connect the dots, you take a bird's eye view, it's very clear what's going on. Now the question is, what are we going to do about it? And here it comes down to how we have clarity about it and understand the dynamics. And ultimately, the dynamics also play themselves out in our own microcosmic life. But that I'll discuss more next week. But I want to just say, on a concluding note here, that even though every death is tragic, the fact that there was only 2,000-3,000 deaths, 2,500 deaths was a miracle. Again, I'm not minimizing. Every death is tragic, but on a morning like Tuesday morning in downtown Manhattan, could have been 50,000. Easily. So that itself is something, but still a tragedy it was, and those families that lost family members, and I know a number of them, lost husbands, young women, young mothers, and so on, and a number of Jews as well, etc. So clearly it's a yard site. There was one particular woman who just had a baby. She was pregnant September 11th, and her son was born on Yom Kippur. That year, 13 years ago. So now the son is getting bar-mitzvah this year. And she named, of course, the son after her late husband, who was killed in the World Trade Center. So there you have like a story itself of a birth, a death, and a birth all happening in one shot, the same name, named after his father. So I know a number of people I remember at the time that obviously always continued to use consolation. So we can't forget that on a personal level. And the collective level, at the end of the day, 9/11 simply brought the truths of the world and the Middle East right here on our doorstep. Simple as that. With the goal of at least waking up. And frankly, the only way to redeem any death, whether it's the death of Israeli soldiers in this last battle, or the death of people who died in the 9/11, is if we continue to just ignore, or we continue to be clueless as we were 13 years ago, then it wasn't worth it. Now, no death is ever worth it. But at least it should be a reminder that we have a battle on our hands that must be won. And it's going to be won in minds and hearts more than in the battlefield. Because you're dealing with people that it's not about, Vietnam is a classic example. Vietnam was a backwards third, fourth, fifth world country, which was not, that people use bamboos against an army like the United States. And tell me, is it even conceivable that Vietnam should not have been won by the United States? And they didn't win. How did they not win over such a country? The answer is very simple. Because every American soldier who was there had no idea what he was doing there. They had no idea what are we fighting for. They had no idea even what victory means. What was the victory? No one was looking to build the country homes in Vietnam and America. It wasn't like that. It was this vague concept of not the domino effect of not allowing communism to spread through southeastern Asia, basically. Now, maybe there was some basis for it in the 1956 or 57 in the wake of the Second World War and Stalin and so on. But at some point it became clear that there was a battle that was going nowhere. And they won because the people there, it's what we call in Hebrew, were Meshugala Eshe Dover. They were Negei Benefesh. A Vietnamese, it was their land. The Viet Cong, it was their thing. It was their personal lives. And American soldiers didn't really care one way or the other. So if you have two armies at war, and they're both rational armies, and they're going with strategy and weapon, who will win? The one with the better strategy, with the one with more firepower. But if one side is passionate and they're fighting for their beliefs, and the other side is very powerful but doesn't have beliefs, who do you think is going to win? Because even if you win the battle, you lose the war. Because when you have passion and you believe in something, even if it's crazy, you have a completely different type of commitment to the battle than someone who may have a lot more weapons, but they don't have the willpower. They're mediocre. They're mediocre in attitude and apathetic, etc., etc. So Vietnam is an unbelievable lesson that battles are far more than just firepower. Yeah, of course, it's true that in the end of World War II, the Japanese abstinence, refusing to surrender. So Truman had to make that fateful decision, and no, I don't envy him, where he was told clearly, you drop the 2 atom bombs, hundreds of thousands of people will die immediately, and millions over the years will be maimed until this day. The radioactivity, etc., etc. That's a hard decision to make. On the other hand, if you don't drop the bombs, he was told, this war may never end. So you have a suffix and a vadai, so to speak. Here you know for sure how many people will die and how many people will be hurt. Here it's a doubt. We don't know. But the Japanese refused to surrender. They had this thing and they dug in and that was that. And Truman made the decision. Maybe if there's CNN and all that's going on today and there were no blackouts, he probably couldn't have made the decision because every Tom, Dick, and Harry and the streets would be voicing their opinion. But he made the decision, as difficult as it was, and the war did end as a result. And if he dropped an atom bomb, it's a serious decision. It wasn't just a bomb in a city. It was a massive effect, as I said, till this day. But the results were, Japan and Germany did rebuild and became peaceful nations. At the end of the day, they are allies today. So clearly something was done right, despite the deaths, and I'm not justifying them. That's what happens in times of war. The point I'm making here is that there was an ideology involved. I think Americans have not fought an ideological war maybe since the Civil War, maybe since World War II, but I mean on this ground, on this earth, since the Civil War. So we're not really cut out for understanding what's going on here. But we have a lot of firepower. But until you relate to the fact that there's a passion behind all of this, it's going to be very difficult to fight this type of battle. And this one's a far, far more complicated one because it's not about territory and it's not about resources even. It's about things that are invisible, ideological ideas, philosophy, religion, faith, etc. So I want to say, as we approach the end of this year, and we will pray for the peace of the world on Rosh Hashanah. That's what we do. We don't just pray for the Jews. We pray for the whole world. That may be a year where we will finally come to help the world understand, say we as Jews, what Abraham intended, to make peace with God. And when you make peace with God, you make peace with other people. And even if two people have very different religious opinions, and they may be very angry at each other even. That doesn't mean that anybody in any way compromises another person's divine image. Which frankly, a beheading is the most a glaring way to defile God. I mentioned last week from the Parshas Kiseitze, it says that even when you hung someone, even when someone hung, you had to take him down because it's God's image that's hanging. And Rashi gives the example there of the two twins. One became a king and one was a criminal. And the criminal was hung, but everyone thinks it's the king hanging because they're twins. It's like Esau and Yaakov. So even though one deserves maybe to be hung, but you never defile the divine image, even when there's a crime. And it can go on and on and on. So it should be a blessed year, to all, both personally and collectively, and gashmis and ruchnis, and obviously peace, but not fake peace, a real peace that comes from strength and comes from clarity and comes from not compromising on what matters, and ultimately the love of what God wants in this world, shalom. Real, this is the path of God. The whole Torah was given to bring peace into the world, as Bilam told the nations. And that finally those nations will ultimately embrace, including Ishmael, will embrace those principles in peaceful ways and in compassionate ways. So with that we conclude this class. I want to just make a few announcements. Philip is beginning to give his class. I will not be giving a live class next week. I will be in a completely different part of the world. Not the moon. I'll be in Australia, Sydney, Australia. So, but I will be recording a class, so there'll be one online. It won't be live. Live meaning right here to see your beautiful faces. But you can see my beautiful face online. So it's a one-way street. And then the next Wednesday is Rosh Hashanah already. So I will not be back here in this room till between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Since we are here with each other physically, I want to wish you all personally as I said, a Shana Tova, Begashmis, Beruchnis, Begashmis, spiritually, materially, and all the blessings that you may need and surely need, both in health, in parnasa, livelihood, those that have to find their soulmates, those that have their soulmates and need to appreciate it and figure out how that shalom bayis in that sense, as well as blessings and nachas of children and those that have grandchildren, even though you're all so young, it doesn't look like anyone here has grandchildren. And yes, a year where we will dance at your wedding. Talking to you. Say amen. Amen. Yeah. And it should be a blessed year. There's been a challenging year this past year. And this is what we pray for. But we also have to do our part. So hopefully in the last days of Elul, where we increase in charity and we increase in good deeds and prayer and in study, we all do our part and create a keli, a container for these blessings. And of course, especially our special blessings for the Jews, our brothers and sisters in Israel. It's the land that God watches all year round, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And some people interpret that meaning from one Rosh Hashanah to the next, Rosh Hashanah ad Achar Shana. And it's an honor to always spend time with you and be part of the trajectory of your spiritual journeys. And any way that we, the Meaningful Life Center, can be of help, please let us know. And we intend to commit and recommit to all kinds of new things for the new year. More to come that you shall be hearing about. Many exciting stuff, and especially trying to find clarity in these complex times, and also empowering us with the life skills and tools necessary to not just remain sane, but to be proactive in knowing how to forge ahead in every possible way. So thank you very much. We have 60 days. You have some copies? You don't have? Well, those of you following the 60 days, if you want to get the daily emails, be happy to send them to you. Just let us know. The book you can get online. We don't have one here, but it's a great tool for day-to-day journey. And the days continue. We're now close to the 15th today, the 16th day, the 15th day of El, and then continues into Tishrei, and then through Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and so on. So Sukkot as well will be Wednesday night. So Wednesday night is going to be somewhat affected by this year's Kviyas, so to speak, the schedule. But there's been Rosh Hashanah between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we'll announce the rest of the details later. But any Wednesday that is not holiday, I will definitely be recording and making sure something is broadcast. So I'll miss you. Be well, everybody.
Great.